Yeah.
Some of them drank. I
So
don't
what?
know.
Yeah. So the question is, what did you do on your days off?
Well, there really wasn't a day off. There's no Sundays.
You never had.
I don't remember a day off.
No.
I just some days you may not have a flight for some reason or other, but mostly you just.
Before we got into combat in Honolulu, we were flying hot and heavy. You had 8 days work and 1 day off in 8. And you'd have to go into Honolulu and see how much fun you could have and then take the chance on having an early morning flight when you got back.
Well, in combat, we generally go down, I would, and sweat out the boys that were out there, see what the flights, watch them come in and check on them and see how they did on the target and what the target was. Because
Count
you
the
knew the
planes.
next day you're going to be doing the same thing.
You did have a day off now and then.
Yeah.
Oh,
Remember-
sure, because I've been going through my logbook recently for
Oh, yeah.
reasons which I can't recall at the moment, but I did tell Pat there was a story I wanted to tell and bore you all with, which goes into day off a little bit. There was a packet boat that ran between Castle Passage and Peleliu that carried our mail, because the mail came in up at Castle Passage, and that was a Navy guy who had this LCI, flat bottom sucker. And Bob Svar, who, God bless him, is not with us anymore, got very close to this guy. He was, I think, full lieutenant or something like that, in charge of the LCI and some sailors. And they wanted to see really what things were like on the ground. Well, at this point, there were still Japanese up in the caves in those ridges, quite a number. They would come and steal our food at night if they could, and various things like that. We'd find indications of their presence. It was against the law for us to go up into the ridges because we could get hurt. And we weren't paid to get hurt there. There were other places. As a matter of fact, Cowboy was very much against it. Well, Sven, Bob's fire, he said, they want to go up and they've been good to us. Let's go. Let's show them. So we got a Jeep and we went up to the ridges, and we got out and we climbed up over a couple of the hills and into one of those narrow valleys, and we're walking along, and we come to a place. It was kind of a big open place and a great hill there, and then a whole area where it had been blasted by the Marines to close a cave entrance. Well, it hadn't. It had tumbled down great hunks of rock in front of the cave entrance, but you could stand on the rocks and still look right down there, and there's a hole, you know, big and bigger. You didn't quite have to get on your knees to get into it. So we're there with this Navy lieutenant and a full lieutenant, maybe a JG, and Sven and myself. And I go down. To get down to the cave, you had to go off over these rocks down, and there was a sort of an easy slide down to the bottom. And I looked in the cave and couldn't see anything, and I looked back up to the guys about head high. They're standing on the rocks, and I said, I didn't see anything there. And I looked down, and these rocks that had come down had come like this, and it was a brilliant day, and the color's either white or black there. The coral is whitish, and here's this ray of light, and there's a black shadow. These guys are standing on top of this. There's holes back in there on the side we're standing on, and here's this, I can see a leg with a shoe on it. Now, we had seen bones with shoes from the early battle when the Marines had such a mess of a time in there. But this had meat on it. And I just said, we had our 45s and our baseball caps, that's what. And I got off from away from it, and then to Sven, there's somebody down here, you know. And he said, BS, that's not true. And he came slithering down, and I said, look around the corner. And he looked, and he saw this meaty leg with a shoe on it. And he pulled out his 45, which we'd never used, and loaded it, and went around. I leaked around it, and he fired it sideways, and that foot jumped back. Well, we moved our butts out of there and got up on top, and we told the full lieutenant and his pal, go find the Army. The Army had taken over this area. What was it, the 81st Wildcat Division or something like that? Get somebody up here. Guys are trying to, find these fellas. So after a while, it seemed too long. Now, this is all silly, but Bob Swar got at one end of this cave. I got at the other, and we were smoking and singing, come out, wherever you are. And we'd light a cigarette and throw it down in and say, if you understand us, we got a whole pack of cigarettes, come on up. And all that kind of nonsense. Finally, they arrived. And I remember he was a lieutenant, Army lieutenant, and they had helmets, and they had M1s and grenades and various things, and there was a rather hefty sergeant and a corporal. And we told him what we saw. And the lieutenant and the corporal went down. Now, we're standing on the rock, and his helmet's right here. And he's looking down, and he said, well, I can see here's some of our rations. He could see where they'd stolen some of our stuff. Yeah, there's somebody been here. And I heard this little click over there. And I hit him on the helmet, and he looked up, and I went like that. And he turned, and he fired the M1, which was a deafening sound in this cave, and right after it was this ping, and then all hell broke loose. From under there, this screaming, like somebody's arms being pulled out of the sockets. I've never heard such a terrifying noise in my life, and I'm not a mud marine, and I never want to be, and God bless them. I turned and ran about 20 paces, and as this went on, I had stood there long enough to see what looked like a green can come out, like it would be a green can with could be a cigarette lighter. And it exploded. Sven had gone halfway down, Smar. And when all this started, I could see him scrambling like a cartoon and the ground coming under his feet, trying to get the heck out of there. And I saw the stuff picking over his head, the rock from of the cave, big entrance. Anyway, I took off with the screaming, and then the thing says, you can't do this, for God's sake, and turned around, and I didn't run back, I walked back. And the screaming stopped, and I got there, and the lieutenant is still there, and the corporal is there, and the rather heavy sergeant was over behind a rock quite a ways away, I've noticed, and he looked up, and nothing was said, and he came up and he got out, and he came and he was very pale. He was a red-headed guy, and he took the helmet off, and his words were, I've been here for 3 weeks or whatever it was. I've seen a few. That's the first one I was ever able to get before someone beat me to him, and I got him right between the eyes. That's an absolute quote. And I said, what'd you see? He said, when you knocked me in the helmet and I looked over, this guy had just stepped out from another crevice in the fallen stuff and was leveling one of those Jap Lugers at him just very carefully. And he was too darn careful because this guy whipped the M1 around, bang, and nailed him. Well, that's the most exciting thing for Sven and myself, and we couldn't tell a soul because we'd be court-martialed because we weren't supposed to be up there. So we got back, and I don't know that we ever did. Did I ever tell any of you this story? Not heard that?
We won't tell anybody.
Okay, well,
We want you to be court-martialed.
doesn't matter now.
They'd have to call
Anyway.
it back to after you did it.
Huh?
A question that I have was, you were at Green Island before Peleliu, and that meant that you were on some combat missions before before Peleliu. And I want to hear about your first combat mission where you actually where you realized the enemy was out to do you in. Just sort of recall that.
Start, go around.
Bill?
I've told you about my experience.
Okay, well, you want to tell us again?
Well, I had, my first reaction was, those people are shooting at me. And I was a little surprised. And then I wondered if I would ever get used to that. And I really didn't think that I could, but you know, after a few times, you get convinced they can't hit you, and you don't worry about it any longer until they hit you.
Yeah.
You're bulletproof.
Well, I had visions of being just scared to death all the time, and that really wasn't the way it worked. You just
Wally, how about you? The first time you got shot at?
We were sweeping down New Ireland, and Boyd McElhaney was leading us, and I think it was Les and Bob and Peebles and myself. And all of a sudden we looked down and we were over in a Jap airfield and they were shooting the hell out of us. So we opened up ourselves and got the hell out of there. And that was the first time.
So how long did that last?
No, I didn't put a watch on it.
As fast as you can fly.
Yeah, as fast as you could get out of there. It seemed forever to get out of range, but it wasn't, of course. I don't know if we did any damage to them, but they scared the hell out of me.
this doesn't reflect any particular credit on the Marine Corps, but some funny mistakes were made. We had one officer who had spent a lot of time in Greenland before he entered flight school, and he was a major, but had no more flying time than most of us second lieutenants. And he had a flight of 4 men, and he was taking them over from Green Island to the Rabaul area. And he thought he was putting them in line abreast to go in on a strafing run, but he gave them the signal for a line astern, and Parmalee was his wingman, slid in right behind his tail, which is what that means. And they dived in on this target, and he said, "Open fire." And Parmalee, who was funny, he was Robert Benchley's nephew, and a great artist, great kid. He said, I had him right in my sights. I knew if I pulled the trigger, I was going to hit him, but he's a major, and he said, "Fire." And he pulled the trigger, and the major, whose name won't be mentioned, said, I'm hit, return to the base." And they landed, and everybody was gathered around his plane, and one of our wise old NCOs picked up a 50 caliber round off the ground, and the bullet hole clearly showed the round was from behind, and the torn part was on the other side of the blade, and he stuck the 50 caliber in there, fit perfectly. He said, "One of your own people shot." No, the Japanese shot him. Parmalee just grinned and went on his way. But he was thrilled to be hit.
Sam, how about you?
It wasn't on grain because I wasn't in the squadron then, but I remember my first mission very clearly. I got a medal. Oh, did I deserve it? Oh boy. I was flying Bob Peebles' wing, and we were out to destroy a barge, series of barges. And your first mission, you don't see anything. You think you see stuff, but I looked down, I watched where I didn't see the barge. Bob was telling me where the barge was. I had no idea there was a barge down there. So he went in on a strafing run and shot and pulled up, and I went and shot into the trees right where he'd shot. I saw nothing else. Boom! Great puff of black smoke and red fire. I hit the barge. It was weeks before I ever saw it. By then it was a sunken hull under there. Weeks later I finally saw what I had hit.
What you've done.
Yeah.
This was when? When would this have been about?
That was on Peleliu.
This was on Peleliu, yeah.
So, October, November of 40?
I couldn't tell you the year, let alone the month. Yeah, it's just when we were there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pete, how about your first?
First time I was shot at twice. Darcy was leading us. We were, again, a trail, so we wouldn't bump into each other. I was tail end Charlie. And it was gorgeous. That was the thing that impressed me. As we neared Rabaul, we saw the sisters and the color of the water and the greenery and the jungle. And we were up, I don't know, a few thousand feet. And not threatening anybody. About well out over the water. And all of a sudden I saw these sort of fireflies coming, and they appeared to be looping right over the long front cowling of my Corsair. And what the hell is that? And then a occurred to me, somebody is shooting at me. And here, this was idyllic. I mean, it was so peaceful, such a beautiful, and I was furious for just a moment. And I turned out of formation and fired, and of course he was so far out of range, it was dreadful. But anyway, shut him up, and we moved on. So then we get on above Rabaul. He didn't go into Simpson Harbor or any of that. We were up, and we got very low over the jungle, and we're just looking. I'm looking at stuff, and I see above me there's like a plateau, except there's jungle, except there's a line of yellow, like a yellow, just a straight line and no trees. And I thought, well, what is that? And I'm going low and slow and come up, oh, well, it's an airfield. It was either Rapopo or Lacunai or one of them. And I, holy smoke, and here, I shouldn't be here, I know. And I start to turn, and all of a sudden, all this shooting starts. And that's really when, and Darcy was, by then, he was up here with the other guys. And I learned not to get that far away from anybody ever again. And I remember him saying, come on, Pete, come on, Pete. And these puffs, and one of them apparently hit under the tail. Didn't hurt the airplane, but it was close enough so that I had that thing, if you've ever been in a canoe or a boat where the wave catches you, you're going with the wave, and it's going faster than you are. And I had that, whoo. I thought, my God, a guy could get killed here. And Darcy saying, come on, Pete, come on. I had that thing so wide open.
It's funny. It's funny how they don't look dangerous at all when you first see them. Little puffs of smoke.
Oh, yeah.
Just a little puff here, a little puff, black smoke there. And you don't really associate that with anything dangerous.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, one will be a little closer, and you'll hear bang, 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 bang. Something has hit you, and it's now rattling around inside the aircraft. Yeah. And that gets your attention.
So the shrapnel would enter the plane and rattle around inside?
Yeah, very often.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes a hell of a racket, and it really does get your attention.
Well, that black stuff at Corsair wasn't pretty.
No. By that time, I knew. Yeah.
You know, one of the things that I've heard is that the anti-aircraft over Corsair was particularly tough. Is that your experience?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was. We were ordered not to go there.
The myth is you could get out and walk on it, and I believe it.
We had a lot of practice. Only when we were ordered to hit it.
We had a lot of practice.
For a special occasion would we do so. Otherwise, we stay away from it.
Val, you were going to tell us about your first experience.
Similar to Pete's, I had a flight, I don't know, there were four of us in the plane, four-plane flight to Rabaul, which was a Japanese naval center of some kind or other. And we were going over there to do something, and anyway, we were in a trail position, and I happened to look back, and this little white puff was following me around, which encouraged me to dive for safety, and I made it home. But then from Green Island, the one that I think everybody wants to hear about, we had a flight to Caviang, which was on New Island, and there were 4 or 8 of us, I don't know how many, on what they call a plane count, see if there were any Japanese planes down there. And we looked over the field, and in the process, I got a 20-millimeter shot through the wheel well of my airplane, through the cockpit. And I knew this had happened to me, and I put my head back there, and there was blood on it, see? Which was great, because I got a Purple Heart for it eventually. This was enemy fire, and you have to have it for enemy fire.
What altitude were you, remember?
God, I guess about 10,000 feet or something like that.
Way up there?
Yeah.
I'll be darned.
I don't really remember, but
Yeah.
I think that would be the standard procedure. But anyway, I had, of course, had no radio and so forth. But I don't know how far that is from Green Island. That's where I was.
Over 100 nautical miles.
Yeah.
It was quite a while, and I know that I put my gear down, and it came down, and somebody eventually checked it and said, your gear is down and locked and whatever. But I landed, and I saved the tires, because I cartwheeled. And I beat the hell out of the gun sight in the cockpit.
With your face.
Yeah, with my nose. With my nose. And
Beautiful landing. And the right wheel folded because it had been damaged, and it slid sideways, and it went wingtip over wingtip and broke the outer wings off of the Corsair, so there was nothing but that root. And then it straightened up, and Val thought it was pretty much all through, and he popped his safety belt. And then it went tail over nose, broke the engine off and the tail off, and threw him into the gun side. And he climbed out, and the ambulance was chasing him and trying to, and he was bleeding very badly. The gun side had done terrible things to his face, and these corpsmen in the ambulance grabbed him, put him in the ambulance, and were holding him down. And he was drowning in his own blood, and he was strong enough that he could throw the two corpsmen off and lean forward so the blood went outside. If it had been me, the corpsman would have killed me. I wouldn't have been strong enough. And I've got a picture of Val, and we all have standing beside this airplane. It tells you one thing. The plane was designed to protect the pilot. It tore the front off, the tail off, both wings off, but the area right around the cockpit was almost intact. And he got a free nose job. Well, it wasn't exactly free. It had to be
If you
had
look
to be.
carefully, you can see the gun sight embedded.
Yeah, Val, wasn't that the flight where they gave you a candid camera and wanted you to take pictures in the revetment?
I think it was.
Don't you remember that?
no, I don't.
I think it was.
I couldn't believe it. They would do that because you were trying to fly with your knees and shoot pictures and advance the film. I thought that we were trying to suppress the anti-aircraft fiber.
And our flight surgeon, who shall be nameless, took 120 odd stitches in Val's face, and he came up shortly after that for promotion to captain, and by that time the flight surgeon had been transferred elsewhere, and a doctor in Espiritu Santos looked at Val's nose and shook his head and had to redo the whole thing, and he said, "We got a pretty tight union, we doctors, but I'm going to report that man to the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery because he really did a bad job," and I won't tell you his name. But
How long were you out of it, Val? I mean, did that take you out for a while?
A little while, I guess. I healed up, and I don't know how long.
Not
I
very
flew-
long. I
I-
thought you were gone home, and
I flew some more missions out of Green Island, and that's where we were at the time. And then we got an R&R at Sydney, I think.
yeah.
And,
Now, I'd like to go to September of 1944. You've just been told that you're going to go to Peleliu. Finally, you find out where you're going to go for this hot action, where you're going to have all kinds of opportunities. And you fly your mission, and you're finally coming toward Peleliu. You see it you're finally seeing this island. The First Marine Division has now taken the landing strip, and you're about to land. What are your initial impressions? Val, how about you? You're now looking at Peleliu for the first time.
I can't even remember that. I was in a rear echelon for Peleliu, and they flew the main squadron over most of the squadron over, but the division I was in, or the flight division I was in, was the last one to go there, and I guess this was what, about 10 days after the.
Some while
First
after
flight,
I was in
yeah.
that group too.
So it was pretty well squared away by the time we got there. In fact, we had a landing runway, and so
Yeah.
to land in, which the previous flights weren't sure of until they got there. But that was my initial impression. But
Well, what about when you got off the plane? What was your initial impression of Peleliu?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
What am I doing here?
I don't know if you remember, but we had a sergeant named Gabby Gessner.
I remember him, yeah.
Yeah, and he earned his name.
From Houston, Texas.
Yeah, yada da 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 da. A very fresh, wonderful guy.
Yeah.
And there'd been a sniper up in the hills, still on Peleliu, of course, because that hadn't been silenced at all. And Gabby had been shot in the neck So when we're getting off that plane, Gabby's there and he can't talk. He's got this thing that has shut him up for a while. That was one of the first. How'd that happen to you, Gabby? This goddamn snipers from the sky. Anyway, but you guys, these two were, I think, in the early group that went in.
Okay, well,
Yeah, better to hear that.
Well, it was kind of like a homecoming. I landed, and my plane captain, a fellow named Frank Samuels, rushed out and shook hands with me. And it was about a 4-hour flight into Peleliu from Maui, and I was tired. And I said, "Is there a men's room around here, Frank?" And he pointed at a 2x4 up on a little ridge, and he said, "Be careful, it's mine. Stay within the white tape lines." And I didn't have to go to the bathroom at all. I just stayed till they took us to our new camp area.
how about you?
Well, I was in Cowboys flight, and I remember we didn't have a runway to land on. We landed on the taxiway and crawled out, and I never saw a place like that. It was, I can't describe it. It was horrible. And I thought, boy, we're going to have to live here a while. And they had our tents right in the middle of the airstrip, and the artillery, the howitzers and the big heavy guns fired over our camp into the hills. And it was a little noisy all night long. And the ring, what do you call those rings around the artillery shells? Every now and then one would come off and go, whoa, 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 right through your camp, maybe through your tent. That was kind of interesting.
Did you experience any short rounds? I mean, no.
No, we were fortunate there. We got no short rounds. But
There were the paraflares. You remember that? That would keep you
yeah,
up.
we
Yeah.
did
About
daylight
that.
all night long. Those things, they always kept one going. That was interesting, wasn't it?
They'd shoot them up over the ridges, and they would sway. So if you look, so here's mountains, small mountains. The shadows of small mountains would be swaying like this, and one would come down, another one be up, and they're just, just to keep their heads down from doing something they shouldn't. The Japanese who were up there, and there were many.
What do you recall about the food?
It's better left unsaid.
I remember this. We went up. They had big oil tanks, 20-gallon oil tanks?
50.
50-gallon oil tanks full of hot water. There was fire under them. They built a fire under them. And you'd finish eating, and you pull up a sharp rock, is what you'd do. We didn't have a mess hall. And then you had these aluminum dishes that had little retaining things in them, so you could have potatoes in there, and they'd slop whatever was in there, all of which was fine. It was bad, but it was fine. And then when you're through, now you had these dishes, and you had your canteen cup and utensils, and you put them all together, and you'd get to the first barrel, and you'd dunk it, and it was boiling, huge. And you pull it out, and soap, and you put it in the next one, that rinsed it, and that was it. And you took it back to your tent.
And then you
So
got
all
dysentery.
you remember about the food is cleaning your plate, right?
That's all I remember.
The food is better left forgotten. The thing I resented the hell out of was powdered eggs. No eggs I could understand, but powdered eggs were an insult.
You got kind of selective on what you took out of your box lunch.
Yeah.
It wasn't all good. What was the best? Candy, I guess.
The candy was the best thing you
I
had.
Candy
think
and a
so.
cigarette. The cigarette was edible or smokable, depending on you. Yeah.
Oh, the lamb.
Goat.
The lamb. At Espiritu Santos, we had a mess hall, which was also the officers' club. It was on the bay, and it was beautiful. But the Australians, for the most part, I admire Australians, but the Australians had sold the Marine Corps all the mutton that was so old it was no longer fur-bearing, and I couldn't stand to smell the gravy from it, much less eat the meat. I just couldn't.
It was like
couldn't.
being back at prep school.
Oh, I never had
It
that.
was
And I
awful.
don't like lamb to this day, although lamb
Yeah, I
is a
don't
far
either.
cry from old mutton.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Bob Peebles is over there. We want to get Bob over here. Okay, perfect.